For 8 summer days, a Korean crown prince was sealed alive inside a wooden rice chest by order of his own father. His name was Crown Prince Sado. The father who condemned him was King Yeongjo, one of the longest ruling kings in Joseon history. Before the lid closed, Sado's young son ran into the courtyard and begged his grandfather for mercy. The boy was dragged away. The chest remained. To understand how a royal family reached that moment, we have to return to a birth that once seemed to save the dynasty. It was July 4th, 1762, at a royal palace in Seoul. The air was heavy with summer heat. Soldiers guarded the gates while court officials watched a father sit in judgment over his son. Sado had already been ordered to end his own life. He tried, or appeared to try, but attendants intervened. Then a large wooden chest was brought into the courtyard. It was the kind used to store grain. Yeongjo ordered the prince to climb inside. Sado knelt before the opening, wept, and understood that this command offered no return. The cruelty of that scene becomes harder to understand when we look at Sado's beginning. Yeongjo had already lost an older son and had waited years for another male heir. When Sado was born in 1735, the royal line seemed secure again. The king celebrated the child's quick mind and placed enormous hope upon him. Lady Yeongjo, who would later marry Sado and write the most important account of his life, remembered a gifted little boy surrounded by ceremony. But in a palace, love for an heir was never simply love. It was also expectation, surveillance, and fear for the dynasty. Sado was raised apart from ordinary family life, among tutors, attendants, and officials who treated every lesson as a matter of state. Yeongjo wanted a scholar prince disciplined by the Confucian classics. Sado was drawn more strongly to weapons, horses, and physical training. Those interests were not shameful, but they were not the son Yeongjo had imagined. Every hesitation became evidence of weakness. Every imperfect answer became a public failure. The king was not merely correcting a child. He believed he was shaping the next ruler of Joseon, and that belief made mercy feel dangerous. The surviving accounts repeatedly describe Sado becoming unable to speak naturally before his father. He feared choosing the wrong robe, the wrong book, the wrong answer, even the wrong expression. Yeongjo's anger made the prince more frightened, and the prince's frightened silence made Yeongjo more angry. It became a closed circle. Lady Yeongjo remembered that her husband could speak freely with others, yet seemed to lose himself in the king's presence. The future of the kingdom was being prepared inside a relationship where neither father nor son could hear the other without suspicion. In 1749, while still a teenager, Sado was made prince regent and ordered to handle affairs of government. It looked like power. In practice, Yeongjo continued to inspect, question, and sometimes reverse his decisions. Sado carried responsibility without final authority. Court factions learned to use the distance between father and son. A decision could be praised as loyalty to the prince and condemned as disloyalty to the king. The palace slowly divided into people who feared Sado, people who hoped to use him, and people who survived by telling Yeongjo what they believed he wanted to hear. By his 20s, the prince's behavior had become alarming. The annals in Lady Yeongjo's memoir describe episodes in which he could not bear to dress, destroyed robes, attacked attendants, and later expressed regret. They also record grave violence inside his household. We cannot safely assign him a modern diagnosis across 2.5 centuries, and the exact number of victims is impossible to prove. But dismissing every report as political invention is equally unsafe. People around Sado were injured and killed. His wife lived beside a man she pitied, feared, and could not escape. Lady Yeongjo is essential to the story, but she is not a transparent window. She wrote the fullest account decades later after surviving her husband's death, protecting her son's claim, and defending her own family from political ruin. Her memoir is testimony, literature, and legal argument at the same time. That does not make it false. It means every detail carries two questions. What happened, and why did she need future generations to remember it this way? Her account preserves Sado's suffering, but it also preserves the terror he brought into their household. In the spring of 1762, an official named Na Gyeong-eon delivered accusations against the crown prince. The court had heard rumors before: secret journeys, weapons, violence, and threats. Yeongjo punished the accuser, yet the allegations did not disappear. They reached a king already convinced that his son might bring disaster upon the royal house. Political factions sharpened every fear, but factional struggle alone does not explain the crisis. The danger was both political and personal. A sick and violent prince stood one death away from the throne, while the king no longer believed he could control him. The decisive warning came from Sado's own birth mother, royal consort Yeong. According to the later accounts, She told Yeongjo that their son posed a danger to the king and the royal family. It is difficult to imagine a more devastating choice. She may have believed that sacrificing one son was the only way to save Sado's wife, his children, and the dynasty itself. We cannot know every thought behind her decision. What we do know is that after her warning, Yeongjo moved from years of anger and hesitation to a final solution. On the fatal day, Sado was stripped of his status and ordered to take his own life. The prince pleaded that he had committed many wrongs, but did not understand the crime that required his death. Officials stood nearby, trapped between obedience to the king and horror at the destruction of the heir. Sado attempted to strangle himself with part of his clothing, but he did not die. Whether those attempts were desperate obedience, a performance meant to gain time, or both, the result was the same. Yeongjo demanded a method no attendant could easily undo. Then Sado asked to see his son. Yeongjo, the future King Yeongjo, was only 10 years old by modern count. He entered the courtyard, rushed toward Yeongjo, and begged for his father's life. The king ordered the child removed. That decision was merciless, but it also revealed the center of Yeongjo's calculation. Joseon had to survive. If Sado were executed publicly as a traitor, punishment could stain or destroy his wife and son as well. The grandfather rejected the boy's plea while preserving the boy as the dynasty's remaining future. The chest was not chosen because it was quick. It was chosen because it was indirect. Yeongjo could depose Sado, confine him, and allow death to come without a blade touching royal blood. The act remained an execution in everything but name, yet its form protected a legal and political distinction. Sado would die, while Yeongjo could remain eligible to inherit. Historians still debate how much of this method was planned in advance and how much emerged from the chaos of that afternoon. But the result was brutally precise. Remove the dangerous prince without ending his line. The lid closed over Sado in the hottest part of the year. Inside, he could not stand upright. Air entered only through narrow gaps. Palace attendants could hear movement, then weakness, then less and less. Accounts differ over what food or water reached him in the first days, but they agree on the ending. The prince remained confined for 8 days. On July 12th, the chest was opened and Sado was found dead. He was 27 years old by modern reckoning. The son once welcomed as the dynasty's salvation had been killed to preserve that same dynasty. After the death, Yeongjo restored his son's princely title and gave him the posthumous name Sado, a name associated with sorrowful remembrance. It was not an acquittal, and it did not erase the people harmed by the prince. It was a father's mourning written in the formal language of kingship. Yeongjo had solved the immediate succession crisis, but he could not command the court to forget how he solved it. The rice chest became a wound that every later faction could reopen, either to condemn Sado, defend him, or attack the people who had survived him. 14 years later, Yeongjo became King Yeongjo. At the beginning of his reign, he declared, "I am the son of Crown Prince Sado." The sentence was both personal and political. Yeongjo honored his father, elevated his memory, and eventually moved his tomb to a more honored site near Suwon. But he could not simply overturn Yeongjo's judgment without weakening the legitimacy that had placed him on the throne. So the son spent his reign walking a narrow line, mourning Sado while inheriting the kingdom preserved by Sado's death. It is tempting to make this story simple. A cruel father murdered an innocent son. A wise king stopped a dangerous prince. A political faction destroyed an inconvenient heir. Each version contains part of the truth, and none contains all of it. Sado was subjected to relentless pressure and fear. He also became a source of terror to people with far less power than he had. Yeongjo acted to preserve the dynasty. He also chose a death so slow that it still defines his name. The tragedy survives because victim and perpetrator, love and calculation, existed together. Today the palaces remain, and so does the question sealed inside that wooden chest. Was Yeongjo saving a kingdom, punishing a dangerous son, or finishing a tragedy he had helped create? Perhaps the most honest answer is that he was doing all three. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Nightfall Tales. Here the old records are open after dark, one human choice at a time.